Good morning to all. We are going to start now. I have the privilege to present Professor Maria Fasley, our today keynote speaker. She is from University of Essex, UK, where she's professor and the head of the School of Computer Science and Electronic Engineering. Her main research interests lie in formal theories of reasoning, agents, and the applications of agent technologies to e-commerce, such as negotiation protocols, auctions, trading agents, supply chain management, as well as trust in electronic marketplaces. She also has been leading teams in international trading agents competitions, TAC, which features complex benchmarking in market problems since 2001, achieving consistently good results. She has also been interested in pedagogical research, and in 2005, she awarded the prestigious National Teaching Fellowship by the UK Higher Education Academy for her innovative approaches to learning and teaching and supporting the students' learning experience.
Thank you. Can you hear me at the back? Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give a talk at EPIA. This is a great honor, and I feel very privileged that I've been invited to give a keynote talk at such a specialist and quite prestigious event. I'm going to depart from the previous keynote speakers. First of all, I'm not going to blame Helder Coelho for anything, so it's not his fault. No matter what I say today, please don't blame him. Secondly, I don't have a Mac computer. And thirdly, my presentation, in comparison to the previous two keynotes, might almost seem a bit boring. So I apologize in advance for that. If you want to fall asleep, that's fine with me, as long as you don't snore. It's the snoring that I think might annoy other people. So I'm going to try and give you a flavor of some of the things that we've been doing. You've heard a little bit about my profile. I have done theoretical work as well as practical work. This presentation concentrates on quite recent, actually, practical work on agents and multi-agent systems with applications in electronic markets and a few more things, as I'm going to explain in a minute. So this is the outline of my talk. I'm just going to give you my view, if you like, on the agent and multi-agent systems paradigm. And then talk a little bit about complex multi-agent systems and challenges, the role of the environment and the decision-making component within that context for agents, and then how perhaps we can regulate agent behavior and understand social order in these complex systems that we are trying to create. We're not quite there yet, but hopefully we'll get there through the use of trust, for instance, and roles and normative concepts. And then I'm going to end with just a few slides on my view again on agents and multi-agent systems, perhaps as a disruptive technology. So one more thing before we go into the main aspects of the talk. I have the tendency, when I get quite nervous, to talk really, really fast. So if somebody notices that I pick up speed, please feel free to wave at me so I can understand that I need to slow down. Believe me, I can go through slides very quickly. We are supposed to be in this era, or this era of ubiquitous computing is dawning upon us. And this is basically where we as humans are being surrounded by computational devices which we do not necessarily see, but they are there. They may be in this room, for instance, and they can sense things like temperature or our collective preferences and dim lights or increase light. So the nature of computation in this new era that is dawning upon us is going to change. Well, it has already changed, but it's going to change even more. So we are moving from computers that have been used as mere calculation machines just to do fast computation for us into an era where we use computers to delegate, or computer systems, if you like. We delegate things to them, our goals, tasks that we want to achieve, and continuous interaction. So we continuously interact with these systems. Now, to build these new systems that have this delegation model behind them and they are supposed to be in continuous interaction with us, we need new software engineering methodologies and theoretical models, because we need new ways to design and develop such systems, because these now need to reflect this shift from mere calculation into delegation and continuous interaction. So these new systems, where we are supposed to be delegating goals to them, and we are supposed to be interacting almost in a seamless manner, they have to be smart. And lots of different people are going to give you different definitions of what a smart system is or what it should be doing for us. Here's some view, if you like, or some of the characteristics that we would expect these systems to have. So we would expect them to be autonomous or semi-autonomous. We don't want them to be completely autonomous, because that might jeopardize what we want to achieve. They might decide to do things that we don't want them to do. We want them to be able to act on the user's behalf, actively seek to achieve their goals, and also replan or adapt their goals when changes happen that affect them. They should also be able to learn and adapt to the changing environment, because the environment can interact with the system in all sorts of different ways, and the environment itself may change, in which case the system has to adapt its behavior. We want these smart systems to be able to interact seamlessly with other systems for either short or long-term periods, because we might want them to form relationships with other systems. And one of the fundamental aspects of such systems, when we talk about users delegating goals, is users expect to have personalized experiences. I don't want my search engine or my personal assistant to be offering me the same advice, if you like, as it would be offering you. I want it to adapt to me. I want it to be personalized. So agents as a paradigm, they are the natural metaphor for actually building such systems. Well, that's my view, at least. And they have a number of strengths as if you like, as a paradigm, as a software engineering methodology, if you want to see it as that, as an abstraction methodology. They provide us with the concepts, the models and the techniques to design and build these systems that are, on the one hand, heterogeneous, because we expect them to include not just synthetic agents or computational agents, and I'm using the term quite liberally here. These agents can be not just software agents, they can be holons, they can consist of hardware, they can be robotic agents, they can be agents that have emotional attitudes, as we heard yesterday. They are complex. The systems can be complex, they can be decentralized, so there's no single point of control. Multi-agent systems as a methodology allows you to develop such systems. Open, so agents can come and go, they can appear and disappear at different times, and they're very dynamic in nature. So that's what agents and multi-agent systems as a paradigm can offer you. Now, if you look at current examples, and this is just a fragment, for instance, if you have watched the movie Lord of the Rings, all these epic scenes of battle that you see there, basically behind them there are little agents that are running and they are interacting with each other, and that's what you see on the screen. I mean, if you look at it, it just looks like an epic battle, and perhaps the first time you watch the movie, you think, how many extras have these people employed? Well, they haven't employed many. Actually, they just modeled them through agents, so that's why they were able to create all these scenes. And Massive is the company, the system that they have developed to actually create these scenes, and they have been used in other movies as well. Agents have been used in logistics, optimization, and scheduling. One example is Magenta, for instance, and they have this scheduling system, and different companies have used them to schedule their operation. For instance, Avis in the UK are using their technology. So you have agents that are attempting to basically, when you have drivers that have cars and they need to move around the UK, you can optimize the moving of the vehicles in the country in all these rental places through the system that Magenta offers. You have agencies like NASA going into space, and they're using agents and multi-agent systems for aspects of the work that they do. You have other companies like EOS, and they have developed EPIA-2013, which is a health monitoring diagnostic system. So it acts as you can take their software and you can employ it in all sorts of different ways, and basically it can detect, it can diagnose problems, and it can inform the user and can take action. And you have other companies like Rockwell Automation, for instance, that have invested quite heavily on agents and multi-agent systems and holonic agents. In fact, holonic agents include a hardware component. So they are companies that are heavily investing in agents and multi-agent systems. And you can see some of the applications that agents have been used for. So here's our agents that we are trying to build to be able to work in such a complex environment. And this is the typical Norvig and Russell definition of an agent. You have an agent which interacts with the environment. I have represented the environment here as a cloud, as a black cloud, in fact, because the environment can be quite nebulous. It can almost seem to an agent like a black box. I send things there as an agent. I get something back, but I don't really perhaps understand what is going on there. Now, depending on the type of environment, the environment may not look like a black box, may be more transparent, may have more, you may have access to the information that enables you to interpret it, and you can have other agents. And these other agents can be other agents like the one on the top here, or they can be very different ones. And the problem is that this environment keeps changing, so agents keep appearing or disappearing. They may be offline or online. And the problem that our agent has is it needs to think, that's what this represents up here, has to find ways to interact with the environment in order to achieve its goals. So to build good agents, we first need to understand this environment, because every different environment can have its own intricacies and complexities, and unless you understand it, you won't be able to build a good agent, good within quotes. There are different definitions of what a good agent can be. That's why it's in quotes here. So what we need, once we have an idea about the environment, is to come up with proper decision-making components, strategies that the agent can employ in order to deal with this environment, interact with the environment, interact with the other agents within. Now, what this also means is that if you want such systems to be self-sufficient, then you need them, you need these strategies to be able to adapt. So you want your agents to be able to adapt their behavior so that they can deal with these rapidly changing environments in some cases. And sometimes these changes may not be completely understood. So the environment may be not as, sorry, there seems to be a delay. So the key point is heterogeneity when you attempt to build such agents, because if we want to have open distributed systems, you cannot assume that every single agent that you're going to have in there is going to be made with the same tools, it's going to have the same attitudes, it's going to have the same predisposition, it's going to be selfish, or it's not going to be malicious. There is going to be heterogeneity. It's inherent within the kind of systems that we are trying to build. And heterogeneity, on the one hand, offers you this flexibility, robustness, reconfigurability, because you can create a system to do one thing, and provided that you have injected appropriate mechanisms for the system and the agents to self-organize, they can do new things in the future. However, when you have these systems are heterogeneous, it means the agents have different goals. They have different implementations, and they may be based on completely different architectures. So the behavior of the whole system is not fully predictable. But at the same time, we also need to ensure that when we build these systems, actually they do something useful. Otherwise, it just beats the purpose. You build a system for what? So how are you gonna ensure that this happens? You can use, for instance, things like trust mechanisms to try and regulate the agent behavior, or you can make sure that you have rules within the system through some kind of centralized authority. Trust mechanisms are usually decentralized in the sense that they are built within the individual agents, but conformance to rules, things like social dynamics, and norms, as I'm going to talk about later on, they are more centralized mechanisms for regulating agent behavior. So let's talk about the environment a little bit. As I said, it's widely, you can have different types of environments. Just think back to the types of applications, of the examples of applications that I gave you. Each one of these types of applications, it's a completely different type of environment. And there is no way, maybe somebody can prove me wrong, there's no way you can build an agent that will be able to fit within all of these different environments and perform equally well in all of these. So the environment, as I said earlier, plays a key role. The environment itself imposes a layer of complexity. If it's dynamic, if there's a lot of uncertainty, if there's imperfect and incomplete information, or even too much information, there are environments that there's so much information available, the agents just cannot handle all this information. And you also have heterogeneity, obviously, and there may be events in the environment, either endogenous or even exogenous, that affect that specific environment, because you can, the notion of an environment you can abstract. You can have environments within other environments. So these kind of factors may not be easy to discern at the time that you actually build the agents. So the decision-making component of the agent and the strategies that you build, they very much depend on this environment. If we are talking about agents that directly promote a user's goal, then these strategies need to encapsulate the user preferences, the user goals, priorities, and these need to be well understood. Otherwise, you will not have a very happy user. The other thing you need to consider is what is the purpose of the agents that you're building within that environment. Is it perhaps a simple monitoring tool to give you information? Is it to replace human decision making, so you completely remove the human from the loop? And what kind of agent are you trying to come up with? Are you trying to replicate human intelligence, the human strategies within that environment? Are you trying to improve on the human decision making? So we can make decisions quickly as humans, but there will be environments in which there is computation that needs to take place that we cannot do as fast, so perhaps agents and in general computer systems can be used. Or is it an aid to decision making, as in decision support? And then, of course, if you use static or adaptive strategies within your agent, this decision-making component, well, you can imagine how complicated the problem can become. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to start by giving you an example of a piece of work that we've done, which looked at the environment and the decision-making component strategies of the agent to explain some of these things that I've talked about. And we looked at the foreign exchange market. The foreign exchange market is where you have the trading of currency. So it's an electronic market. Agents have been used in electronic markets before. But we were interested in this problem because it has obviously become apparent not just to us, but a lot of economists say so as well, that the classical economic assumptions, like perfect rationality and homogeneous trading agents, they fail to explain what happens really in electronic markets. Because humans are not perfect reasoners, we're not perfectly rational. We act in all sorts of different ways. Now, in some of these electronic markets, you have a lot of data. As I was saying earlier, there are environments where you have way too much data to deal with. And there's the term big data. Another term that can be found related to this is high frequency data. So you get data very frequently. I'm talking about second by second tick data, for instance, in electronic markets. And as humans, we can discern some patterns, but when you try to build intelligent agents to help you in that task, obviously you need to build the strategies and the mechanisms to identify such patterns. And we thought that for these kind of problems, agent-based models of markets, where we can have agents and we can simulate behavior and we can build different strategies within them, would be the ideal, if you like, methodology to use. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand the dynamics of market behavior in the first instance, so that we can then build agents that can actually work in such an environment. So, I'll explain the process, what we did. We were very lucky in that we obtained a high-frequency data set from the foreign exchange market. This was provided by Oanda, which is a company that has a trading platform. And this was quite a big data set. I'm talking about 40,000 anonymized accounts. And this is over 2.25 years. So it was January 2007 to March 2009. So we had a lot of data. These were fully anonymized. We had no idea who we were looking at, but lots of data. And we went through a process of filtering and cleaning and then identification of stylized facts that I'm going to briefly explain. So this is what the data set looked like. We had information about accounts, so we could troll through the data and we could identify the transactions that belonged to specific accounts, and we could trace what was happening. So these were as they were coming out of Oanda, and then we had to go through a process of filtering the data set, simply because every company, as you can imagine, they have their own ways of checking things, and there were transactions in there that were check or test transactions that were affecting the whole data set. So we had to go through a process and clean that. And then once we did that, we analyzed the data set, attempting to identify if there were any patterns, anything that would be interesting. And these were the stylized facts that I'm going to explain in a minute. So these stylized facts, they're basically statistical properties of that specific data set, so of the FX market as it was encapsulated within the set, the data set that we had. So once we had those data sets cleaned, and then we had the stylized facts, so we had identified the statistical properties, we went through a process of modeling trading agents. That was quite complicated, actually. I'm abstracting a lot of the details here. I'm just trying to give you a top-level picture. Oops, that was a bit fast. Right, okay. So we built a platform that was able to simulate what happens in the foreign exchange market. The market itself was able to produce its own stylized facts, its own statistical properties. It was generating its own data. And then what we did was, once this works, just refuses. We used the stylized facts from the real market to cross-reference what was it that we were producing. Basically, what we were trying to do here is approximate the properties of the FX market. So we went through a process of refining the models of the trading agents. This may need a new battery for tomorrow. And we went through this process quite a number of times, actually. Right. So very quickly, to understand the environment, I hope I've given you an idea of what the data looked like. Basically, it's a time series. You get prices. Instead of using physical time to understand what was happening in the time price series, we used what is called an event-based approach. So you don't look at time as having a homogeneous structure in terms of seconds, for instance, or hours. You don't look at that. You look at events, and you look at prices as they change and by how much they change. So you establish a threshold above which, or below which, you say there's an event. So the price has changed significantly, so you have an upward event change or a downward event change, depending on this threshold. So that's how we try to understand the market, not by using seconds or hours or looking at days or even weeks. We attempted to we use this event-based approach, which is not my work actually, to try and to understand what is happening. So as you can see here, you have an upward event, which is followed by an overshoot event, and then the price goes down. And depending on what kind of threshold you use, obviously, you can identify events at different magnitudes. So how you calculate that threshold is obviously important, and you have to look at the price time series quite closely. So instead, as I said, of using the seconds, we used events. And this is important because this was then captured within the strategy that we built for the agents within the market that we created. So back on the stylized facts, these statistical properties now, we don't look at the second by second data, we look at these events. And that's how we attempt to identify and understand what happens in the market. And you can have different types of stylized facts, or we have identified different types of stylized facts. You have seasonality. You have patterns that depend on days, actually, and on months, and you can identify them. But these are related to the transactions that take place. You have correlation stylized facts, and basically these are the positive linear relationships between different trading activities, like, for instance, trade numbers and volumes, the number of buy and sell executed orders, the number of opening and closing positions, and the intraday price volatilities and trade numbers and volumes. And then scaling laws. And these establish quantitative relationships between these different the size of the price movements and the market activities as they happen within these events. That's why I attempted to explain very briefly why we don't look at seconds, but we take into account this new type of event. And we have confirmed some scaling laws that were already known in the literature, but we also uncovered 4 that seem to be specific for FX market, the foreign exchange market activity and the data that we had. And there's a description here. Basically, again, you use this notion of event. So given a fixed threshold, remember the threshold by which you can identify an event, then the observed 4 new scaling laws state that the average of trade numbers, trade volumes, numbers of opening and closing positions, as you observe them within that event, of that specific size, that's why size is important, are scale invariant to the size of this threshold. So this is how the market operates. You have agents that are buyers and sellers. You have a market maker in the middle. And this market maker, this is the important thing, basically feeds data into the market based on the processed data set that we had. So we control, to a certain extent, the prices, in the sense that we initiate bids in the beginning of the day, and then the agents are free to do whatever they want. The reason for doing that is because in this case, we wanted to anchor the results of the simulation, because we wanted to check whether what we were building in these little guys were actually strategies that give you the same type of data that you observe in the FX market. And that's why you have the market maker here. But we can build other types of markets based on this. I mean, we can vary the prices if we want to. So the system goes through a process of buying and selling. So the agents interact through the market maker. This is how these markets work. The agents don't interact directly. They interact through these companies like Oanda, that are market makers, and they issue buy and sell quotes, and then they make profit based on the bid spread. And oops, that was really fast. Yes, so these agents are heterogeneous. They have different wealth distribution, and we have experimented a lot on this front. They have a different trading window, because the foreign exchange involves agents that are actually based in cities like Hong Kong or Tokyo or London or New York. So we implemented within the agents a trading window to, if you like, assign them a specific region of the world to represent what happens in real life. And then the kind of strategy that we decided to use, because we wanted something simple here, we call it zero intelligence directional change trading agents. Now, these are based on this idea of the event. So these agents, their strategy is very simple. They don't learn. All they do is they have a fixed threshold, which is drawn from a uniform distribution between 0.01 and 2%. And then this is their threshold. So they act if the price changes above that threshold or below that threshold, depending on whether they want to buy or sell. So it's very simple. They don't learn. And we have contrary and trend following agents. And contrary agents basically act on the idea that if you like, the trend of the price is going to change. They form this expectation. Whereas the trend following ones, they place orders on the idea that the trend is going to continue in the same way. So that's the difference between the two types. And then they have different risk attitudes, they have different profit objectives, and we identified these profit objectives looking at the actual data that we had. And what we noticed was that real traders, they place bids when the price changes by a very small amount. So they don't necessarily wait for massive changes to happen, and that has informed how we formulate the profit objective within these agents. And our agents are able to place in the market both market orders and limit orders. Market orders are for direct execution, so if there's another order that matches what you have put in as a bid, then the transaction will be executed, whereas limit orders, they are in the future. They may not be executed at this moment in time. It may take some time. And what you can have is profit-making and loss-stopping limit orders. And we have variable order sizes. So the agents, depending on what kind of budget they have, they can actually order different quantities. And the market simulates what happens, obviously, and it generates its own data set, which we can then check against the real data set that we have. These are just some screenshots from the platform, and we can control all sorts of things. We can control the prices that the market maker issues. We can control the agent strategy. You can see what happens in the market, and you can capture the results. And just some indicative results of what we found. What you see here is, remember when I was talking about stylized facts and I was talking about seasonality? And because you have these different trading centers like Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, and the New York one, opening at different times, and time is represented here as GMT time. What you see in in the blue line is what the real market generates in terms of number of trades and trading volumes during a one-day period. And there's this double camel-shaped thing that has been identified in the literature, and this is GMT time. So at this time you have a peak, the first peak, and this is because both the London stock exchange and the market is open, but you also have markets in Tokyo still open. And this is what happens when the USA market opens, when you have the New York stock exchange open and you have their trading time. So the second hump of the camel, if you like, is always bigger. And we check the data, we check across periods, all sorts of different currencies, they exhibit the same pattern. Now what you see in the red line is what our market is able to exhibit as behavior in terms of the number of trades and the trading volumes. So we were able, with that configuration of agents, to actually come quite close. I mean, it's not identical lines, but you would agree with me that they're quite close. Now, okay, right. This is what happens when we remove limit orders. Limit orders are the orders that can be satisfied in the future. And as I will show you in the results, if you change some of the parameters, you no longer get this close correlation between the data that the market generates and the real market. And so look at the shape of the humps here. You have a very high peak here for some reason, and another one here. These are the trade volumes, these are the trade numbers. So you don't, once you remove the limit orders and you keep everything else the same, you just don't have the same behavior. So the ability to be able to place limit orders seems to have an effect on this particular type of market. And we checked other things, like, for instance, how many agents do you need to have? Because there are these considerations in the literature. How many agents do you need to have in an artificial market to be able to generate similar data? And we varied the number of agents from very small number to very high numbers. And we found that within our simulation, at least, and the data that we had, we needed about 10,000 agents to generate this very close approximation to what happens in real life. Once you remove the heterogeneity in the agent strategies, these contrary and trend-following agents, again, you don't get the same fit. There are other, I talked about the limit orders, the mixture of contrarian and trend-following agents. You need to have a balance. Once you tip them out of balance, we don't seem to be getting the same result. And there were other things that we checked within the simulation. Now, as we experimented with this, another question that we had was, okay, we tried this very simple strategy. Others have tried just using random agents, and they have got good results in different types of markets. What would happen in our market? Do we need a strategy that learns? So we've started experimenting with that, and we used different mixtures of strategies to explore what happens. And we kept some of the parameters of the market the same, obviously, that we knew were affecting the exhibition of the stylized facts. So we did try zero intelligence agents. These are random agents, and we just placed a budget constraint so that they wouldn't go bust all the time. And we also tried genetic programming, and these were quite complex agents that we built, and they were using genetic programming. They were attempting to learn these rules to trade, and they were also using fundamental trading techniques. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Right. Let's go again. So, just some indicative results again. What you see here is different mixtures of strategies that we've tried. For instance, the A line, which is the blue one, is the real market data that you can see here, and you can see the double hump. B is zero intelligent agents. Then we have the mixture of strategies that I showed you, which actually approximates what happens in real markets. And then we tried different mixtures, all sorts of different mixtures. So I'm just summarizing some of the results. And when you use different mixtures of strategies, you don't get these kind of results. And one of the fascinating things that we observed was actually the genetic programming agents were the ones that were performing the worst. In terms of return on investment, they were losing, within quotes, really badly. Now, because they are so complicated from a strategy point of view, they evolve all these rules, it has been quite difficult to identify what's the specific bit that leads to that. But it was quite a fascinating result. Now, to be able to say you don't necessarily need learning, you have to try other strategies. But this was just a start. So the results so far from the experiments is that this simple strategy that just uses a threshold and you have contrarian and trend following agent seems to better approximate what happens in the FX market. Now that might be quite a surprising result, because what it would suggest is you just need to inject these simple agents in there and they don't necessarily need to learn, but obviously a lot more experiments need to be run. So you have these markets, and some of these markets that we've been talking about, like the FX market, they're quite well regulated. But there are other types of scenarios, other electronic markets and other scenarios in general, other environments, where you do not necessarily have a centralized mechanism to control the agent behavior. And this heterogeneity that we were talking about earlier comes at a cost. Because you cannot guarantee that the agents are going to behave in the way that you want them to behave. And this may be due to a different set of reasons. They might not behave the way you want them because they're malicious. Or they may simply fail. They may not actually comply with their specification. The developers, the programmers may have implemented them in a way that something has gone wrong. So this outcome of pairwise interactions can be clouded with uncertainty. So how can you protect the individual agents? Well, one idea is to instill a notion of trust within the individual agents. So when agents attempt to interact with others, instead of just blindly taking a decision, they have a concept of trust. It's not the same as having an emotion, but they have a view of how trustworthy is the other party that I'm going to interact with, and that's how they make a decision. Now, trust as a concept, and we're not going to go into many details because I'm running out of time. Maybe for the first time in my life I've slowed down quite a bit. It ranges from personal trust, the trust expectations that I form as an individual, to reputation-based. I can ask you what you think. And there has been a lot of work in this area, but one of the things that has not been addressed properly is this combination of an agent's economic decision-making with a trust component. And this is what we've attempted to do here, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly. So we built an agent-based market, again, because it allows us to see what happens in the market, in an environment, and we can see expected as well as unexpected things. And we have producers and consumers. And it's the consumers that form expectations, beliefs about the trustworthiness of the other agents in the market, the producers, and the other consumers, because the other consumers can act as recommenders. So we have an oligopoly market, which means not a lot of producers, just a handful, and lots of consumer agents. So a consumer agent wants to initiate a proposal, needs a service, initiates a variation of the contract net, gets bids, and then can reject or accept bids. This is the typical framework. Now the producers, they just want to maximize their profit, and they set their price following a derivative follower algorithm. And one of them has a competency associated. So they might want to serve a consumer, but they may fail. But they may still be honest. So they can be malicious or honest, but they can also be incompetent. So you can have an honest producer who is also incompetent, but he just can't help it, basically. The consumers are the really complicated ones because they have a cognitive model, and within this model, what they take from the environment is bids, from the producers, the experiences, their own experiences. They have a way of interpreting them, and recommendations. And through this nebulous activity, again, they have to decide on the best bid as well as the quantity to order, and this is important. And they take into account all sorts of things. Our model is actually quite complicated. I don't have the time to go through, but basically, you have a trust belief which can consist of a reputation element and a direct experience element, and on top of this, you have confidence in your direct experiences as an agent and confidence in your reputation, and all of these things feed into your economic model. And that's where it gets quite interesting, because as a consumer, not only you want the best price, but in this kind of model, you want to choose a quantity that will also minimize your risk. So all of these things fit in there. Some formulas on how we calculate that. Again, we ran a lot of experiments. We were interested in particular in malicious producers, incompetent but honest producers, whitewashing producers, those that oscillate. They want to take advantage of their good reputation, so they can cheat on several rounds until the reputation falls below a certain level, and then they can attempt again to be good. So we run lots of different experiments, and we look at things from an evaluation point of view, like market efficiency, the distribution of the trade surplus between the producers and the consumers, and the price evolution, just some indicative results. This is the quantity that producers can produce, and this is the number of consumers, obviously. So when you have a very small number of consumers, there's, as you can see, the price goes down. The producers start quite high, but there isn't much demand, so they have to drop their price. These are standard things that we would expect to see in a model, but it's nice actually to be able to reproduce them. And in this case, you only have honest consumers and producers. Now, very briefly, this shows the distribution of the trade surplus for consumers when you have different capacity in the producers. And obviously, the more capacity you have in the producers, the lower the price, so the consumers benefit more. That's what this 3D, very nice 3D figure shows. That's the bottom line. And we can actually show this. And then we ran experiments where we checked against agents that were using this very complex trust mechanism and actually subcomponents of it, and against omniscient agents. These are the agents that know the probability of producers or other agents in the market being malicious or incompetent. They just know the probability, they don't know the outcome. And actually the results that we got basically suggest that the kind of framework that we have put in place, at least for this particular scenario, the consumers, the honest consumers and producers don't lose out a lot. Actually, we approximate quite a good result based on what the omniscient agents are able to do. So a few of these nice graphs. This is the whitewashing where the producers oscillate. And more diagrams. I can talk to you for hours about this, but I won't. So the framework that I briefly outlined actually has helped, in this case, the producer agents and the consumer agents that are honest to actually not lose as much in the market. And they learn. They can learn from their experiences, from the reputation that is being transmitted to them, and they can actually form a social network around them of agents that they trust. So, as I said, it's quite complex. Now, instead of using these trust mechanisms that are built within agents, you can have more centralized control mechanisms that rely on things like institutions and norms. So, this is, for instance, you can imagine taking agents to court if we ever get to that point. So we can use similar concepts, and some of the work that we've done relies on the concept of a role, because this appears to be quite important. It encapsulates functionalities. We all relate to each other in different roles, and depending on the role that we are, our behavior may change. So we are trying to understand how agents behave in this way. So one of the pieces of work that we've done has looked at multi-agent systems as consisting of this notion of a social agent, and the social agent can be an individual or a complex multi-agent system, in fact, and how they interact. And then, as I said, the social agent can be one of these little dots or a set working together. And you go down to the individual agents. I'm running out of time, so okay. So we've looked at things like collective commitments and how they relate to roles, and then to social commitments. That's commitments between two individuals, obligations, how these come down to obligations, and then individual intentions, because all of these are linked. And then the notion of power. Because within roles, you may have roles that have specific powers. As a school teacher or as a university teacher, I have certain power to end a lesson, for instance. So that seems to be quite important. And the interesting questions that we are looking at now is, as the system evolves, you expect the roles to evolve on the one hand, but then you also want to incentivize your agents to keep within the roles that you have given them. So that's current work. Right. It's only going to be another 2 or 3 minutes, and I think I'm going to be on time. So we've looked at some aspects of complex multi-agent systems, like, for instance, the environment and how you can build trading strategies or other types of strategies depending on the environment that you are dealing with. And I hope I have shown you that in some cases you may not need a very complex strategy, but that is not universally true. Now, I also showed you some examples of where agents really are, and they have been used in companies that are heavily investing in this technology. But we don't see agents all around us yet. And that may be because agents and AI in general, I think I would abstract away from agents and talk about AI in more general. We are reaching a point now where it might end up being what are one of these called disruptive technologies. I'm not sure if you have heard the term. This was coined by Clayton Christensen in 1995 in his book Disruptive Technologies Catching the Wave. And these are in contrast to what are called sustaining technologies that just keep improving a little bit, little by little. You have in disruptive technologies, you have different attributes being offered. That are valued by mainstream users, but they perform far worse at a specific point in time. In 1 or 2 dimensions, they may be more expensive or something else. And then the performance attributes that the mainstream users value, this improves at some point quite rapidly. And agents may be, and AI may be this kind of technology. Right, so this is performance, this is time, this is mainstream technology, this is where we are perhaps with the disruptive technology at this moment in time, and that's the projection. This is what happens with disruptive technologies, and I'll give you a very brief example. Some of us have worked with diskettes when we were doing our first degrees or our PhDs. The newer generation perhaps have seen them in museums, but I have used them quite a lot with catastrophic results at times because they kept failing. So Seagate, this is not complying. This is an autonomous agent. So Seagate, you must have heard the company name. They were a major player in the 1980s, and they were selling a lot of these 5.25-inch drives. These were the worst ones because they were quite soft and you would lose data. Plus, they wouldn't hold a lot of data. Then, in the mid-98, in 1995, their engineers had actually worked on prototypes, something like 80 prototypes, in fact, of these 3.5-inch drives. But the company at the time was thinking that there isn't such a market for these kind of drives. So they didn't want to promote them. The engineers got frustrated, they left Seagate and they established Corner Peripherals and they started selling to Compaq. These are the 3D, the 3.5 diskettes. And what happened? Well, the technology improved so rapidly, the capacity of the 3.5-inch drive, that basically we've abandoned 5.25-inch floppies for these because they were harder, so your data were not destroyed as easily. What did Seagate do? Well, it entered the market too late. But this is an example of a disruptive technology because at some point in time its performance was not good and then it just shot up. And obviously you need to have the foresight as a human, if you are an investor, to actually invest in these disruptive technologies, but Seagate didn't see that. And then I think they concentrated, they abandoned this market and they concentrated on hard drives. But software and hardware are completely different beasts. Hardware, as you're aware, develops much faster. And we now have very fast computers, multi-core computers that can do really crazy things. Things that in the past you would need huge rooms with computers. So, object-oriented programming, does anyone know when it was invented?
60s.
Correct, 62. When did we start teaching object-oriented programming? 90s, I would say. I mean, at least where I was.
Late 80s.
Late 80s. And when was Java released? 95. So you can see the difference. You have software engineering methodology invented in 62, and you have the programming language to deal with that in 1995. So maybe this is what is happening with AI and agents. There are lots of challenges. I don't have the time to go through it. One massive one is, and that's why a lot of companies are resisting in adopting this new technology, is what happens with emergent behavior. If all these systems are able to learn and interact with each other, after a point they're beyond your control. You don't know what they're going to do. So that's a major concern. There are other issues, like for instance personalization. Parallel computing is going to be an interesting challenge in the future, and we anticipate that there will be a lot of different new exotic types of internet applications. So maybe that's a role for agents to play there, and you can see some frames from games here where agents have been used a lot. Now, are agents and multi-agent systems, or AI perhaps in more general, here to stay? I think you don't need to listen to me. I mean, there have been other keynotes, and this is what we are here to discuss. I think they are here to stay, and they will have a more prominent role. And with the new hardware and how fast the machines can now do things for us, I think we will see a more rapid adoption of these new technologies. And the next era, if you like, apart from ubiquitous computing, I think it's going to be about user-centric, so the user is going to be in the middle, delegation-based, personalized computing, apart from these systems being networked, of course. And that's the end of the talk. Oops.
Thank you.
5 minutes over.
Yes. We have time for a few questions, please.
I fully agree with what you have said when you emphasized the importance or the relevance of the environment for a multi-agent system. That's very important. I'm sure that you could elaborate a little bit on the proactiveness possibility for an environment, like either sanctioning or incentivizing agents' behavior. I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit on that. And that's why when you explain us about trust, I missed, or I didn't catch that idea of the contextual dependence of trust. I mean, because the environment can set up a kind of context, And trust is very, very much contextual dependent. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Just very briefly on, because they are on the same thing, but they are slightly different topics. If the environment is completely outside of your control, then obviously you cannot have a mechanism that provides incentives to the agents. The agents need to find ways to work with each other. But there are environments in which you need to do that. For instance, when you have assigned roles to agents and you expect them to be able, through these roles that they hold, to accomplish tasks, you need to incentivize them. Now, what kind of incentive that might be? That might link back to trust, because if you have a mechanism of reputation, centralized or decentralized, because you can have both. You can have a central reputation system, or like we have created here, this is a decentralized reputation system that might create incentives for agents to act one way or another, like we are seeing with the whitewashing producers, where their role is to provide consumers with the goods. They attempt to take advantage of their good reputation, and then we incentivize them in this kind of environment by, well, the other agents within this complex environment basically varying their belief of trustworthiness towards this, so they drop out eventually. I mean, we have run experiments in which we see eventually some of these whitewasher producers dropping in terms of profit, and some of them just stop trading in the market, because after a while, obviously, you don't have any assets to trade, and you stop operating. Does that answer the first part of your question? Now, I don't remember the second part. Yes, yes. We were not, I mean, about this work, we were not trying to come up with a generic framework of trust. Other people have tried to do that. That was not what we were trying to do. In fact, for us, we did exactly what you are suggesting. We contextualized trust, because in different situations, trust can take different forms, and it can mean different things to different agents. So the context will be not just the environment, but actually the agent itself. So it's how much my own predisposition, if I look at myself as an agent, what is my own predisposition and the kind of environment that I'm operating within. I mean, I'm going to take different risks with you lot, because you're trustworthy, you're academics, I would think, than I would take with another group in another context. So it has to be contextualized. And that's why I said in the beginning, I don't think we can build an agent that will actually be able, will have all the right attitudes, all the right components, decision-making strategies, and you can plug it in different environments and it will operate fine. I don't think we can get there in the immediate future. Does that answer your second?
Maria, thank you for your presentation. At a certain moment, you were saying that, okay, nowadays you have lots of data in different areas, lots of data. And if I understood, your idea was, let's go another way around. Let's say, if I have a complex multi-agent system, I can I have the possibility not to have to deal with these large quantities of data. So I can make models, I can simulate. Okay, but to simulate and to have models, you have to calibrate the models, etc., etc. So my point is, where does your approach is from the different from what you have before? Say lots of data, and okay, if you have models from the experts, okay, but if you produce other kinds of models, you have to calibrate them, and again you have all these quantities of data to work with.
Let me start by clarifying that we have used a lot of data, but our point was not to create a marketplace and then say, well, we now no longer need this data. The point of the first part of the work that I explained was we have lots of data. We have financial markets generating gigabytes every day. We need to understand behavior within these complex environments, and maybe the data, if we find ways to analyze the data, we can actually understand what the marketplace, how it operates, what drives this dynamic behavior, what is it that these agents do or don't do at certain points in time. And then, if we are able to replicate that within our model, we can go a step further and say, okay, we know, well, we have a model that approximates what happens in the real market. Let's now play with it. Let's now play with two different things. You can play with the rules of the game, so you can change the structure of the market, maintain the same strategies and see what happens, or you can change the strategies and see what happens in the market. And then, of course, you can combine the two, and you can evolve them in parallel. So that's why we used data in this specific instance, because first we wanted to understand what drives behavior. What is it, how many agents do I need in this market to get the same statistical properties of the real market? What kind of profit objectives do agents have to generate this kind of stylized facts? And you cannot talk to real traders are not going to reveal to you what is it that they do, because obviously they make money out of it. And that's why we use the data, because we wanted to identify from the data, and we have no idea who we were looking at, whether there was something there that could tell us what is it that they were doing. And we saw, for instance, that they don't need necessarily they don't look at massive changes in the price to act. They can act when this percentage of change, this threshold, is quite small. But the ultimate goal, if you like, is now that we have this marketplace and we have one way of approximating what the FX market does, let's now explore and see what happens when you inject new behaviors in. And you can see emergent phenomena. But at least we have a baseline to compare against, because one of the problems of social-based simulation, and there are a couple of sessions today and tomorrow, is you attempt to build these models, but they're very difficult to validate unless you have real data. And that's what we were lucky to have in this case. We had the real data to play with. In another scenario, we may not. Does that answer your...
Okay, I in fact have two questions. One is very small, I hope.
Just for a second, Luis, just to say we could do the questions at the same time for Luis and Anna, just not to, no? Okay.
At the same time? We speak at the same time?
No.
Oh,
No.
Okay. So one is specific about the trust model you have. I just wanted to know if it is a binary trust model, either completely trust or untrust, and how you revise trust, the process of revising.
Yeah, it's not a binary model, it's not a 0-1, it's a range. It's between 0 and 1, with 1 being high trust. And then to revise, you revise not only you revise several things. Depending on which parts of the model you are using. In the fully blown model, you you rate your experience with the producer, because you have interacted, a transaction has gone through or it hasn't gone through, products have been delivered or not. So you rate that experience, and then you revise your trust for that specific individual trader. But then, if you have already used reputation, because your trust belief has two components. It has your direct experience, and you can also use reputation, because in some scenarios, you may have exchanges with specific individuals many times. So your direct experience builds a lot. You don't need reputation. But when you are new, say, to a market, you don't have direct experience with others. And in that case, you can ask other individual agents in the market, the other consumers, and say, by the way, what do you think about X? And you get a feedback from them. So if you get feedback, you also have to rate how good that information was once your experience has been completed, if you like. So they update in parallel. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. And the other was, I don't know, I don't want to sound too picky, but you were talking about intelligent agents, and in the beginning I noticed that you, instead of intelligent, you used smart agents, and then at a certain point you used good agents. And so I wanted to know if it was a downplay on intelligence in terms of not considering lesser forms of intelligence, or is it just some synthetic or semantic?
It was partly deliberate, because some other people can get quite picky when you talk about intelligent agents, and they start asking questions. Okay, intelligence means consciousness, for instance. Are your agents intelligent in that sense? So smart sort of plays it down a bit. And good, I use good because you may not get the best agent possible, because you may have too many data, for instance, and you don't have, you can't come up with the best decision to make. So you may not have perfect rationality. That's why I used good rather than something else. Does that answer? Yeah.
So,
Okay, the final question,
yes,
and
okay.
please a quick answer.
I have worked.
Sorry.
I've just been told off.
Okay. Hi. I have worked in a similar model for these trade agents with physicists, and it was very bad to me. It was a bad result that we could reproduce the market as you did with the threshold. It was very so. My question is, I don't think there is zero intelligence. There is intelligence in the market. So, are we going to come up with algorithms and parameters and values that really understand what's going on instead of this zero intelligence? To me, this is it's physics, but it's not AI.
I would agree with you that I don't think there's such a thing as a zero intelligent agent that can perform really well. We can come up with good strategies, but again, they will have to depend on the environment. And every market will have different rules, and unless your agent is able to adapt to different negotiation protocols, for instance, or what happens in the market, you won't be able to have the same strategy working, say, in a double auction, and then in the FX market, or in another type of market like we had with the contract net, the variation of the contract net. So we can come up, but they have to be specific, contextualized within the environment. Was I short? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For that.
Is this available? It was beautiful.
Oh, you're very kind. I will pay you later.
Can we afford it?